Welcome to Authentically, Debz, my podcast. A Southern girl looks at 70. By the way, Black Lives Matter. Hello, everyone. I did retire. It will not be official until August 31st from my day job of teaching incarcerated youth. I think I've been teaching about 25 years, maybe more, and one of those was as a speech therapist, which is what I got my bachelor's in. But it's taking its course, and I am loving having more time to spend on my podcast, acting, with my children, with my grandchildren, and I'm so glad that you're here with me. There were a couple of other things that I wanted to say, although that kind of pretty much brings you up to date on my life personally. We do have an election coming up in November, and I'm going to be very involved with that. I'm not going to get too political, but I will say that if you've been listening to my podcast, you pretty much know probably where I stand on things. I don't want to live in a fascist country. I don't want to live in an autocratic or under an autocratic leader. I want to be an American and to be proud of it again. Okay, let me move on to the first thing that I wanted to mention to you that I forgot as I was telling my life story. In case you didn't notice, the through line in my life story is my mental illness of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. If you'll look back on some of the things I said in some of the previous episodes, several of the things I did were done kind of under the influence of OCD until I was diagnosed properly and had proper treatment for it, both behavioral, cognitive treatment, as well as medication. I developed my own coping mechanisms, and I do believe in God, and I think by the grace of God, I lived to tell this story of my life with OCD. Now I want to tell you something, it's not big, but for me it's always been the little things in life. I was raised by my mom and my grandma because my dad and mom were divorced, and he was away being an Air Force officer, flying planes, the love of his life, possibly besides alcohol. I think I ranked in there somewhere. But I was raised by my mom and grandmother. My grandmother's husband, just to throw this in again, had died long before I was born, and he was a member of the KKK. So I really grew up during the Jim Crow South, but being a white kid, it was something that I was pretty ignorant of, believe it or not, for a long time, sadly. But I did escape the South. But getting back to my grandmother's house, I had a cousin named David, and he was an only child like me. I think I mentioned way back in a beginning episode or two that I hung out with only children, and I don't really know why. Only children, and only children who were adopted. Seems like my parents' friends had only children or adopted only children. And my cousin David and I, he was the closest thing I had to a brother. Of course, now he's like 3 years older than me. He lives in Shreveport, Louisiana, and we have absolutely no communication. I also have two first cousins on my father's side. We have absolutely no communication. One of them I kind of like, but he's crazy. The other one, I understand, is just a totally flat out racist, as is my cousin David. But when David and I were kids, one thing we really liked to do at my grandmother's, because she lived on the edge of town, she had a big old house, and we used to like to play. My grandmother had a big front yard and side yard, and the backyard was actually a chicken yard and a big garden. And beyond that was the pasture where we had a few cows and a few ponies. But the backyard essentially, or the part we liked to play in, was the chicken yard. So it really had very little grass because the chickens would eat all the grass, I guess. And there were some trees back there. There was a mulberry tree that I fell out of one day, and I don't know if I cracked my skull. Who the heck knows? I went to a chiropractor recently, and I had some type of injury to my upper neck and lower head. Of course, that could have been from, a whiplash from a driver rear-ending me. I don't know. But at any rate, we used to love to play in that chicken yard. And the chickens weren't always around. I don't know what they were doing. Maybe they were up in a tree or roosting because they laid eggs. I had some roosters too. But what David and I used to love to do in that chicken yard, there was a big old tree, and that wasn't a mulberry tree, but a big old tree in the center of the chicken yard. And we used to make a little house or camp or abode around that tree. And we played this little game of make-believe, and we called it Poor People. I may have mentioned it before, but to me it's worth mentioning again, because the game we loved to play was Poor People. At least it had no racial connotations. We had nothing but sticks and dirt, and I don't think we worked. I don't know what we did, but boy, we loved playing Poor People. As I've grown up, it's not as much fun as an adult as it was as an ignorant child. So I just had to mention that. That was one of our favorite pastimes at my grandmother's, was going into the chicken yard, and because it looked so desolate and so bereft of civilization in our young, ignorant eyes. And so we called it Poor People. I'm sure we made mud patties, and maybe we had some kind of little utensils, but Poor People was one of our favorite games of make-believe. Poverty in America is not make-believe. Poverty anywhere isn't make-believe. And it's one of our big problems. There should really be no poverty in America, if you ask me. Call me a socialist, but I think we should share the wealth, and I'm not a communist. Okay, let's see. One other thing I wanted to mention here toward the end was when I was in high school. Of course, I still had OCD. I think that may have kind of helped me in a way, in a very sick way, do all the things I did to, make the straight A's, to stand out in school and high school, etc. But one year, and my mother probably had OCD. She had some type of mental illness. She definitely was on the anxiety spectrum, but she was a doll. Everyone loved her. Everyone. Did I tell you she was a Gemini? That my 2 children are Geminis? That my best friend is a Gemini? That a horrendous man that I dated for way too long is a Gemini, assuming he's still alive. But I'm not sure. Oh my God, here comes a senior moment. I'm not sure quite why I mentioned the Gemini thing. But, I know, because it was back to my mother, who was a very precious Gemini. And yeah, I do kind of believe in astrology. I definitely think that it's a tool. I cannot, there are people that say, it's just totally suggestible. And I am a very suggestible person. But I do kind of think it merits some degree of relevance. It's interesting. Anyway, when I was in high school, I had the flu. I think it was my senior year, and I have not had COVID-19 that I know of. Sometimes I think, well, maybe I've had this and didn't know it, but whatever. When I was in high school, I think my senior year, I had the flu. And I had a bad case of it. It just knocked me off my feet. And if COVID-19 is anything like that flu, or a flu that I got shortly after I moved to California to stay in the 90s, I had another really bad attack of the flu. But if COVID-19 is worse than that, I don't want it. I don't want anyone I know to have it. Okay, we're back to me having the flu when I was in high school. I was very sick. I'm sure my mother took me to the doctor, but very little they could do. Drink liquids, eat properly, get rest. Of course, my mother was always taking my temperature, but I was sick. I missed school for, I'm sure, a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. And then I went back to school, not feeling 100%, but you've been out of school for 2 weeks. I mean, it's kind of time to return. So I did. And I guess I was just busy at school. I guess I was just, you're busy when you're a kid, when you're a teenager. You're always doing stuff. Remember, I was dating the college boy, but I was also very involved with school and I had friends. And what happened to me was that I relapsed with the flu. We usually think of relapse as with drugs or, alcohol, which is a drug. But I relapsed with the flu. And that's the only relapse of any kind of physical malady that I've had. I mean, I've relapsed with OCD for 50 years or more. I think actually, and I digress here, but I think actually when I decided that I had to retire was recently when I didn't want to get up in the mornings. I felt anxious and depressed the way I had when I had OCD as a kid. And I hated that feeling. And unlike it was when I was a kid, when I just tolerated it. There's no way I was going to tolerate it. I mean, I had to fix it. I had to make sure that I didn't feel like this every single day, not even wanting to get up. So that was a clue that it was time to make my day job situation work for me or leave it. And I ended up making the correct decision to leave it. But back to my relapse with the flu. Suddenly, I just became very sick again. And having OCD, this was very frustrating to me. I could get nothing done. I couldn't even do my little ritualistic shit. And I felt so bad. And I became very depressed. And my mother saw that, and this always scared her to death. So I remember that she called a friend that I went to school with. This friend was not a close friend, but she knew my mom. I knew her. We'd gone to junior high and high school together. And I think one reason I'm mentioning this is because I am recently back in touch with this friend, at least on social media. Thank God for social media. I don't care what they say. And there definitely needs to be some changes made, for sure. I think these big companies need to be broken up, etc. But that's another story. But I've become reacquainted with my friend who now lives in Australia. She is a fine artist. She does mostly people, portraits. She's amazing. I began to see her work online, and I don't know, we connected on several levels. But this was the child or the teenager that my mother called, asking her, would she call me and try to cheer me up? Because my mother knew I was so depressed. And she thought maybe Michelle could help me, could cheer me up, even over the phone. Of course, she didn't ask her to come over because I had the flu, and that's very contagious, as we know. So, poor Michelle, she called me. I don't even remember what she said, but it didn't sound rehearsed. It just said something like, hey, Dad, how you doing? How you feeling? We miss you, but hey, get well. Don't worry about rushing back, something like that. But it was so touching to me because although I was quite well thought of and kind of sort of popular in high school, I got several awards, but Michelle was French. Her mother was French. She was an Air Force brat. Her father was, I think he was a surgeon, but he was definitely a doctor, and he was in the Air Force. Michelle was very popular. She was a cheerleader, hung with a really popular group who kind of seemed to admire me, but I didn't do all the crazy shit that they did because I was dating this, I didn't know it at the time, but lunatic college kid. And so I missed that stuff. But Michelle called me and she tried to cheer me up. And I did recover finally from this relapse of the flu. And one more thing I'll say about this is that shortly after Michelle and I became kind of reacquainted online, she would often post her art, which is so good. And one day she posted, and she actually sent it to me first, and not to get my permission necessarily, but it was just gracious of her. She drew a picture of me that she said to her this was the way she remembered me in high school. And it was so wonderful. I've even used it on my podcast here, I think, for the trailer. And I said, oh, wow, that's so good. So she said, well, great, I want you to have it. So she sent it to me, and it is now on my wall, framed and all that. Okay, let's see. Another thing I wanted to mention was that while I was pregnant with my first child, I was definitely in the throes of OCD. I also had anorexia nervosa, which is on the spectrum of the anxiety disorders. And it's definitely, to me, a good example of OCD because I was obsessing about being fat, and the way I could control that was with my diet. Thank God I did not become anorexic until the 6th month of the pregnancy. Had I done it the first 6 months, I'm quite sure my daughter wouldn't be here now, or if she was, she would probably have some type of special needs. As it is, as I have mentioned, she's had a very difficult life, and I do take a lot of responsibility for that, more than 50% for sure, because having anorexia nervosa in the 3rd trimester of your pregnancy, for me it meant I would eat one good meal a day, and that was breakfast. I would eat a huge bowl of cereal. It was pretty much the same every day. I would eat grape nuts and full of bananas. I would put bananas on it, and whole milk and coffee, and I would have that was my big breakfast. And then I really wouldn't have anything else until the next morning. And again, I would have the grape nuts, the bananas, the whole milk, and no toast, and coffee. And I did that until she was born. And what I looked like toward the end of my pregnancy was someone that probably lived and had a baby while they were in a concentration camp. Being only 5'2", my stomach was certainly accentuated, but my arms were skin and bones, my legs were the same. I remember after the baby was born, I think I weighed, 98 or 99 pounds, which I guess could be worse because, like I say, I was only 5'2", but I looked like, a prisoner from Dachau or Auschwitz or something. She arrived a 6-pounder because at least everything I did eat, everything I did correctly went to her. I was also doing exercises during at least the last trimester, and the exercise I would do were sit-ups. Now I cannot even do a sit-up, and it's not because I'm 70. For years I've had problems doing sit-ups. I just cannot get that lower back off the ground and sit up all the way. I mean, I can do sit-ups, but not all the way. But at that point I could, and I did sit-ups. Now, no doctor told me don't ever exercise while you're pregnant. Don't do sit-ups. But any person with common sense, and by the way, I hold common sense as to be a very spiritual quality because it's taken me a lifetime to develop it. And I am definitely still working on it. But it would be common sense not to do sit-ups and then lean over as far as you could for what it might do to the position of the child. Now, it might not hurt the child at all, but I kind of did that religiously, and this was part of the anorexia nervosa. After I had breakfast, I actually substitute taught back in that time too. So I think I must have done these exercises after I returned from the substitute teaching. I'm telling you, teaching has been a fallback for me. It's been a day job for me for the majority of my life as an adult. So anyway, when Heather was born, she weighed 6 pounds, thank God. She arrived gorgeous and wonderful, even though I also had, what do they call it? They used to call it twilight. I didn't have a natural childbirth, that's for sure. I don't even have an epidural. I had twilight, and it starts with a D. I can't think of what that medication's called. But so basically, I didn't remember. I remember that I had labor pains, and it took us about an hour to get to the hospital because we lived in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, because my husband was technically still in the Army, and that's where the arsenal was, the Pine Bluff Arsenal, part of the Army. And so it took us about an hour to get to Little Rock, and that's where I had the baby. And I had that baby within 4 hours. So it was just a little over 2 hours after I arrived that I had that baby, that Heather Gray Schrader baby. And she was perfect except her little feet were both of them were turned in. And I think I've mentioned this before in this podcast, but I'm not sure what the medical term is, but the layman term or the slang term is club feet. Her feet were turned in and were really going to have to be straightened. And that, I don't know if it was my fault, but I attributed it to those crazy sit-up exercises I was doing. And the fact that Heather has had such a difficult life, in many ways it would appear that Heather, the choices she's made, that, maybe she's not that bright. But au contraire, she is. She, along with her son, is a wonderful writer. I'd say of everyone in our family, and that includes my fabulous second daughter, who is a marketing specialist, has written a book, has just done all sorts of wonderful things. And she writes differently than Heather. But Heather's a wonderful writer. So there's nothing wrong with Heather's intellectual functioning. It's what possibly happened with the interbrain connections during my bout of anorexia nervosa that caused her to have what has been diagnosed for her as borderline personality disorder. As far as her addiction issues, I think that may be genetic. I'm not sure. But she's a wonderful, precious person, and everyone that meets her loves her. She's also beautiful. She's 50, and like I know I've said, she looks like she's maybe in her late 30s, and she's been through hell. So I just wanted to go on record as saying I feel responsible for some of the problems that my oldest child has had. Getting back to her little feet that were turned in, I remember when she was not more than 4 weeks old, we went to an orthopedic surgeon, and he physically, because baby's bones are not completely formed at that time, he physically turned her feet out. And she screamed bloody murder because I'm sure it hurt like hell. Looking back, I don't know about that. I mean, I know she was tiny. You don't want to medicate a kid that weighs, 6 or 7 pounds, I guess. But, oh my God, it was painful to watch. It was quick, but, like Heather has had pain since she was a month old. I mean, it's like she's truly been through hell. I repeat myself. Then after that, once she started walking, which she could do, we were still seeing an orthopedic surgeon, and she had to wear these little braces to keep her feet turned out. And I remember at that time I was gravely suffering from my OCD. I think I'd already been hospitalized and was released. But at that time, when she was in kindergarten, I was not a happy homemaker, but a housewife. And I remember she would get on the little bus to go to the school, and she wore her braces. Now, when she came home, she would often take them off. She could have functioned with them or without them. But she wore them to kindergarten and didn't make a big deal about it. She seemed to be popular enough. I don't know. I mean, she may have been made fun of. I don't know. It didn't seem to register with me at that point. But she wore that little brace contraption for a while. It kind of fit around her waist and down her legs to see that those feet were turned out. So I guess that's all I'm going to say, except I do accept responsibility for, at least some of the responsibility for the difficult life my oldest child has had. And she has gotten through it miraculously and is still a loving, kind person. One of the most. Let's see, moving right along here. I don't know why I want to, well, I do know why I want to mention this, because it came up, of all things, when I was working with this wonderful actor, a female actor in New York through Zoom. I have a marvelous acting coach, and during this pandemic, he often has casting directors come in and allows us to read for them. He has two actors, a male and a female, that are the readers for his group. And one of the readers for his group, her name is Carrie, and she's a wonderful actor. And I wanted to self-tape some video clips. I'd already read with her in class. I knew she was wonderful. So I asked her, would she be my reader for a self-tape I wanted to do, actually a couple of them. And she said, sure. And so we did that, and then we got to talking, and, you know, I told her kind of what I was doing right now with my life, and she said she was working on a project. She wanted to do something, I think it was probably a screenplay to do with New York, where she lives. Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening to Authentically Debz. A Southern Girl Looks at 70. And if you liked my show, please subscribe, leave a review, and definitely tell a friend. Oh, and make sure and visit my website where you can keep up with my current projects, learn a little more about me, and follow my latest news. And that website is www.deborahjangray.com. The spelling is Debora, no H, Jangray. You can also find me on social media as an activist, actor, and friend, specifically on Twitter at Deborah Jangray, YouTube as Deborah Gray, Instagram as Deborah Jangray, and Facebook, including Messenger, as Deborah Jangray. Same spellings. I'm not everywhere, but I'm definitely not hard to find. And most importantly, blessings to everyone.